our presentation today, the Greek crisis, what is next for Greece and the Eurozone? Obviously, most of the headlines about Greece the past several years have centered on its economic crisis and its impact upon the European Union and world financial markets. But if many of you are like me and don't possess an advanced degree in economics or finance, or don't have professional experience on Wall Street, in the banking industry, or at the IMF, then it can be a challenge distinguishing between what is fact or fiction when it comes to the back and forth of the current negotiations and their potential outcome and meaning for Greece and the Eurozone. That is why HI decided to organize today's very timely presentation to provide us with better information and hopefully for the speakers in a more layman's term language so all of us can understand what's going on. Regarding, as I said, the current economic conditions between Greece and its creditors. And what is the true deadline, the drop-dead deadline that we keep hearing for Greece? And just what are the implications of the next moves for Greece and the Eurozones and to the global financial markets, and especially if deadlines are not met? Ladies and gentlemen, it's our pleasure, as I said, to present the assembled panel of experts whose thorough research, analysis, and perspective on the topic we are pleased to share with you. We are looking forward to hearing their presentation in a very short time. But to get us started today, we thought it would be appropriate to have Greece's representative in Washington begin the morning and to tell us, from his perspective, how he sees things and how his government is dealing with the issue at this time. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome a very close friend of the American Hellenic Institute, and who's somebody who has served from 3 years with great honor and respect his country here in Washington in some very difficult times. It's my pleasure to welcome Ambassador Papaioanno.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick. I thought I'm old enough to gain the privilege to sit there, but you told me no from here. First of all, don't be scared, I'm not an economist. Second, I always had a great admiration for Archie and personally for Nich. Why I say that? He said this conference a few months ago, I understand, and he must knew something because as we speak, and I'm serious now, a very important, almost critical meetings taking place in Brussels, at the presence of the European leaders, of course, the Prime Minister Tsipras, and the protagonists of this economic crisis, as we have been used the last months at least, to follow through the media, the Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, the President of France, Mr. Hollande, and all the players, I mean the big players around the Greek crisis. So, Nick, saying that it's a timely conference, I think it's an understatement. You should know much more before that, and the developments, they just are with you, that were just on time. I'm not going to make an economic analysis because I see distinguished panelists who are going to share with us their expertise, their experience, and their point of view. All I can tell you is that before us it's not a Greek crisis also. Certainly we do have a crisis in Greece, economic but social, not only that, but it's a European crisis. Remember that in my country, the crisis was imported. And of course, the infrastructure was not quite there to overcome it. And we became at the center, at the eye of the cycle, as we say, in a vicious cycle which perpetuates an economic model that is not anymore viable. And that's what we're trying to tell our partners, our vendors, and our allies. And I have to tell you, probably you read in the papers that we have much more understanding here in the United States, who do not play, institutionally speaking, any direct role in this crisis, but with all their weight, their opinion is well heard all over, Europe, and with the IMF and other institutions. what we try to say to our lenders is quite similar. I'll put it in a very simple way. We owe a lot of money. If you want your money back, and suppose that they want their money back, just help us come out of this crisis. That excess debt was not dealt in the past is not true. We all know that our friends in Germany, first of all, they have been the beneficiaries of the ultimate haircut back in '53. And small Greece consented at this point, back in '53, with the Agreement of London, to forgive the German national debt. And I can cite so many other examples from everyday life. So this is not the first time phenomenon that at the end of the day, our lenders, if they want to get money back, they should agree one way or the other. There are different approaches how we can deal with excess debt, but they should deal with this issue. We're not there yet, because we're trying to tell them that the model that have been suggested, the formula, obviously was not working. After 5 years, 25% of our GDP is down, ahead of. In March here in the United States, where you live, within 5 years, in a peace period, to have 25% of your GDP down, more than 26% unemployment, youth unemployment over 60%, there will be a reason. That's what my American interlocutors, they tell me, a reason for a revolution. But the Greek people sustain, and we are ready to find a solution on a rational basis. What's the message from the new Greek government? We are ready to make a compromise which is not going to perpetuate this crisis cycle. In other words, give us money, not for the real economy, but 95% of them to go to service the debt. And then the real economy, you say, what's going on? Nothing. The real economy is suffering. There's a lack of cash flow right now as we speak. Despite the previous agreements, fresh money they have to get in Greece since last August, almost a year ago. Greece at the same time is fulfilling its obligations to the international lenders. So obviously, if you take a rational approach, an agreement is a win-win. That's why we are optimists, and I don't know, and it wouldn't be appropriate because the crucial point of the negotiations taking place probably as we speak in Brussels and elsewhere to make any predictions, but I can tell you from this small, very simplified analysis that an agreement should be reached, pretty soon, I should say. Nich, I will stop here. I would like to thank you so very much for organizing this very timely conference. It's going to help a lot. First of all of us to gain from the expertise of our distinguished panelists. I see a lot of young people. I see a full house here, and I'd like to welcome all of you. And we are expecting great interest to see the conclusions of this conference. And most important, I believe you should agree with me to see what's going to happen. We all expect a very positive outcome of the negotiations at the highest level. Thank you very much for your interest in the developments in our country. And please keep going. Congratulations to Achi, to its president, and the people that they express in every way their support and interest in Greece. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. As many of you know, the American Hellenic Institute, this is not necessarily our main mandate in terms of the economic developments in Greece or even the domestic agenda in Greece. We deal with, obviously, the public issues, the public policy issues that we all know of, and what Achi has been very well known for many years. but obviously this economic crisis does suck up the air out of everything that's going on in Greece today. We just came from a 2-week delegation visit to Cyprus and Greece, where we spent an extensive time in Greece and met with all the top leadership in the country, from the President, Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and Defense Minister, amongst others. The conversation in each one of these was on the economy and what can we do to help in that regard. And I'm pleased to say that what we did in terms of the American Hellenic Institute, with some of the expertise that we have, the great expertise that we have on our board of directors, of which 2 will be highlighted here today, in the form of Nich Chimicles and Jim Marketos, and George Tsetsekos. I see Jim Marketos over there because he's also very a well-qualified board member of the AHI and an attorney in his own right. But we made a presentation and we gave a memorandum to the Greek government on certain things that they may not be aware of within the context of the U.S. government programs that they could take advantage of in this difficult time. Not to say for the immediate future, but for the long-term future. So we try to be viable as best we possibly can as an organization in all areas that affect the U.S.-Greek relationship. To what degree now the Greek government will engage the U.S. government in a bilateral relationship with some of these programs, we leave it up to them. But we feel good that we were able to at least offer some suggestions they may be able to take advantage of without going on to the details here today. However, as I said earlier, this program, this conference, I believe is timely, and because we do want to be able to provide some service and understanding to our membership and to the general public of AHI as to what is going on in Greece, because every day you hear different stories, and in the end, what we feel is no one really knows what really is going on. And it's just so much contradiction when it comes to this issue. So that's why we were able, thanks to our board member, George Tsetsekos, who was a Dean Emeritus at LeBow College of Business and Drexel University, put together this team of individuals that he knows very well in the finance world and who have followed what's going on in Greece, and to bring this home here. But to lead it further, and he will take you through the morning session, is somebody who I consider to be a very close and dear friend and a great supporter of the Institute, who has served on the board of directors now for many, many years. And besides that, he's a great Phillies fan like myself. And that's Nich Chimicles. Nich is a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania and also the University of Virginia Law School. He's one of the leading trial attorneys in the country. And is just somebody who, although we say, well, what's an attorney have to do with being a moderator of a panel on the economy? Well, if you have discussions with Nich Chimicles, you understand that he has an understanding of a lot of things, a true Renaissance man, but he really, really understands the economics and the finances and how all this comes to play regarding the Greek crisis and how it affects potentially the world economy. So with that, I'd like to invite Nich Chimicles and the members of the panel to join us here, and he will lead the morning session from here on. Nich?
Good morning, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Nick. And I'm sorry that the ambassador has already left, because you mentioned the Phillies, and I had to note that a year ago when we were in Philadelphia, Ambassador Papaioanno threw out the first ball. And I was expecting, like so many people who throw out the first ball in a Phillies game, that he'd get it about 20 feet in front of him and then it would bounce to the catcher. On the contrary, he threw 60 feet, 6 inches, and a perfect strike. Wow. And I later found out that he's an athlete, so that proved it. Thank you for being here this morning to discuss and listen to panel members. We have an August panel comprising 3 world-class economists, each of whom in their own way has a direct connection with what's going on in Europe, and as the ambassador mentioned, in Brussels today. The 3 speakers, and this will be the order in which they make their presentation are Dr. Athanasios Orphanides. Dr. Orphanides is a professor of finance and global management at the Sloan School of Management at MIT. His biography is among the materials that you have in front of you, but most pertinent is the fact that Dr. Orphanides had a 5-year term as a governor of the Central Bank of Cyprus, and he was also a member of the governing council of the ECB, the European Central Bank, which is a key player in the negotiations that are going on with Greece. The second speaker today will be Dr. Michael Papaioanno. Michael is a Deputy Division Chief of the Debt and Capital Markets, Monitoring Capital Markets Department, that's a very long title, of the IMF, which is based here in Washington, D.C. In addition, Michael was a Chief Economist of the Council of Economic Advisors of Greece. He has a very lengthy and impressive resume. And the third speaker will be Dr. George Tsetsekos, and as Nich has mentioned, George is Dean Emeritus. He was Dean for 10 years at LeBow School of Business at Drexel University, and recently was elected Chairman of the Board of the Global Interdependence Center. So these three speakers will be addressing different aspects of the crisis that Greece is facing. Just a couple of ground rules. First of all, Dr. Papaioanno is not here as a representative of the IMF. The comments that he is going to be making today are his personal views, and anything he discloses is something that is publicly available and in the public domain with respect to anything that the IMF has disseminated. Second ground rule is that after each speaker makes his presentation, we will move on to the next speaker, and at the conclusion, I'll use moderator prerogative and ask some questions. And then we will take questions, and you see there are mics here in the room for members of the audience to pose any questions. And finally, there will be PowerPoint and slide presentations made during the course of the presentations. And if anyone would like to receive copies of those, you can make a request of the AHI office and we'll arrange for that. So with that introduction, I'd like to now introduce Dr. Orphanides.
My pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank particularly Nich, whom I met several years ago in Cyprus. But I will start by actually readjusting something about my own background. I'm a European who's lived most of my life in the United States. One of the reasons I consider what we observe in Europe to be so tragic today is because we are facing a crisis that may undo what was built in Europe in the last 60 years. This is how serious I think the current crisis is. I don't think it's just about Greece, it's much broader than this. And what's really sad is that we know how things could have been handled better. We have policies that were adopted in the United States of a very different mentality, very different economic prescription, very different politics. So we know there are answers. These are not unsolvable problems. So with that introduction, let me point out that what I'm going to do is emphasize on how we got where we are today. And in my capacity as an academic in quotes. I can't say things that are not polite, are not considered polite in Europe, but they are very important to know. And they are the things that I believe are most important for people to understand in this city, because in my mind the best chance Greece has and Europe has is in this city, not anywhere in Europe, unfortunately. So let's start with the crisis. This is a crisis about Europe, not about Greece. I'm just showing you here IMF numbers, the latest IMF projections for real GDP per person. You can see in 2008, we had, after the Lehman event, a severe crisis that hit both the euro area and US economy. Both economies started getting out of it. What you see here, and this incredible divergence, 10 percentage points per year GDP, that is the damage of the mishandling of the euro area crisis. What started as a tiny crisis in Greece right now, in 2009, has been mishandled so much that it is incredibly costly for the euro area as a whole. And you may ask why? Why did we have this situation? And as an economist, and I should point out that I am an economist, I am not a politician, so you do not need to be afraid. It comes down to some very simple fundamentals. Whenever there is a crisis, losses are recognized, losses materialize, losses have to be spread around. And when you're thinking about crisis management, the whole objective of crisis management is to minimize the losses associated with the crisis and spread them around. I've spent most of my professional career in this city at the Federal Reserve. This is what crisis management is all about. And this is universal. It doesn't have to do with politics, it doesn't have to do with the country. The problem we have in Europe is that, unlike a federation like the United States, when the crisis hit in the euro area countries found themselves tied together as a result of the currency, but without the management tools that each country could use to fix its problems, exchange rate, monetary policy, and without a government that had the mandate to do the proper crisis management for the euro area as a whole. The political structure was not there. That's a big difference of Europe being a loose confederation. Since we're in Washington, I should create this parallel Tom Sargent used in his Nobel address a few years ago. This is Europe today is closer to what the United States was before the adoption of the Constitution, where it was governed by the Articles of Confederation, and the U.S. was quite dysfunctional at that time as well. What you have when you have this framework, you have the triumph of local politics. You have each government in Europe fighting it out about how to avoid accepting losses for their own constituents. If you are in France, for example, and you are the president of France, what was his name? Some guy called Sarkozy, I believe. What was his objective? His objective in crisis management would not have been, should not have been, to do proper crisis management for the euro area as a whole, but to protect France and French interests, French industrial interests, French banking interests, and so forth. Take Chancellor Merkel in Germany. It's not in her mandate to take any decisions that would benefit Europe. Portuguese voters do not vote for her. Spanish voters do not vote for her. Her job is to minimize the cost to German citizens, shift losses as much as she could from others onto others, instead of having, say, German banks incur losses. So this is the game, this is the political dimension in which Europe operated. And what we've seen, unfortunately, in that setup, this is really a one-line understanding of the crisis, is that rather than working together, what we've seen in the last 5 years is we've seen a game where governments have been trying to shift losses to others, and they have succeeded in doing it. But what's the outcome? That means nobody here takes care of the whole. So on the whole, the euro area suffered. This is why the euro area has been doing so much worse than the United States. The United States, we have states and everything, but you had people at the Fed, people at the Treasury, people in Congress, they would actually work towards containing the crisis in the United States as a whole. You did not have anybody fighting for, let's shift losses so that they're not incurred in California and stick it to Texas. This is not how the crisis was managed in the United States as a comparison. So as a result, you had massive distraction in Europe. That's expected. But you realize when you're in a game like that, not everybody loses the same way. You have winners and losers. Some governments play the game better than other governments. Some governments come out on top. And let me show you a summary of that. What you can do here, you can compare real GDP per person for Germany, the United States, and the 11 of the 12 original members of the euro area, excluding Germany. You can see what's happening here. Even though this crisis has been terrible for Europe, it has actually been benefiting massively Germany. This is how well Germany has played this game. Of course, it's evident. I didn't want to show. I don't need to say this. I don't have to say this to you. But I thought I would show you the IMF's numbers, showing you what the history is and also projections going forward. Notice that according to this, the rest of the euro area still has some years to go before it recovers real GDP per capita that they had before the crisis. And the situation is tragic depending on which country you look. If you look at Italy, for example, real per capita GDP in Italy today is lower than it was in 1999 when they joined the euro. This has been a catastrophic crisis for many, many countries. But of course, the biggest loser in this game has been Greece. As the ambassador mentioned, Greece has lost 25% of its GDP. Just to put this in perspective, the depression that you see there in Greece is already projected to be bigger than the Great Depression in the United States. Just to put things in perspective about how catastrophic this crisis management has been. So what happened? What's the original scene? It happened in this city 5 years ago. 5 years ago last month. We have trouble in Greece. There is no denying it that Greek governments, for a couple of decades, were not handling the fiscal affairs of the country well. We should accept this, and the Greek government today should accept the responsibility of earlier Greek governments. But if I look at it as a policy person steeped in how Washington crisis management works, my interpretation of that in 2010 was Greece needs an IMF program. We've seen these programs before. The IMF is an institution that was designed right after the Second World War exactly to solve problems like this. What we needed to do was to allow the IMF to design a stabilization program for Greece and get it over with. There would have been tough adjustment. Most of the programs work in 3 years, a country usually is out of them. Many countries have gone through this program, many successes, mostly successes. I'm going to mention one in Greece, the neighbor, Turkey. Huge crisis in 2000. Just look at the statistics. What the growth miracle in Turkey, what was the growth miracle? The result of it was the result of the IMF going in, fixing the country for 3 years without any interference from Berlin and other European governments. This is the advantage that Turkey had, that Greece did not have. Because Greece was in the euro area, the German government and other institutions and governments in Europe did not let the IMF handle Greece. They actually interfered into the design, with the design of the program, and imposed a program that, for the reasons I explained before, was the most appropriate for them, and the interests they were protecting. This actually what caused tremendous damage in Greece, as the IMF has in documents that have been published, pretty much is telling us now. These are things that were not clear in 2010. They're clear now because the IMF has published evaluations since then. So in 2010, we had a program in Greece that imposed severe austerity of the country, much more than, as I understand by reading IMF documents, IMF staff would have suggested. And we ended up getting into the situation we got into. So let me show you some of the parameters of that program. This is from I downloaded this from IMF documents. So this is a picture of the debt to GDP ratio projections the IMF had in 2010 for Greece. You see that was high. It was supposed to rise a little bit more, and then within 2 years it was rising, it was falling, and it was becoming nicely sustainable. As we found out later, this was made up. It had to be made up. I'll explain why. This is the fiscal adjustment that the Greek government had to do. 10 percentage points of fiscal consolidation, 10 percentage points of GDP, unprecedented. I believe this was the harshest fiscal adjustment program in the history of IMF programs. I do not know all of the programs. It's a fact I would like to check, but all of the programs I'm aware of, this has been the toughest. It was supposed to lead to a minor recession. Nominal GDP would fall a little bit, but start growing within 2 years. Real GDP, this is the recession. Yes, the unemployment rate would have risen somewhat. These are the painful measures and painful consequences. That's okay. The point is, if you fix the country with 3 years, you can take this. But that's not what happened. Let me show you a comparison of the same statistics with the latest projections that the IMF published in the World Economic Outlook that spring. First of all, let's look at what was the one component that is the most important responsibility of the successive Greek governments since then. The fiscal consolidation. Did Greek governments deliver on the 10 percentage point of fiscal consolidation that was inappropriately imposed on Greece? They actually did, according to the IMF. According to the IMF, Greek governments have actually delivered the consolidation they were supposed to, in terms of how much did you cut your deficit as a fraction of GDP. Did they get everything else that was supposed to come with this program? No. The unemployment rate, country is destroyed. You can see that increase. Youth unemployment is 15%. They did not get what they were supposed to get when they delivered the fiscal consolidation. What about real GDP? Well, I've already shown you the pictures. It was not a mild recession. It was a very, very, very deep recession. Even nominal GDP, what we have engineered collectively, all of us involved in this, in Greece, it really sent Greece into the 1930s style debt deflation cycle. You can see it with nominal GDP falling. Why is this important? Because one of the reasons that debt to GDP is so high as a ratio is because GDP has been falling. And if you implement policies that keep shrinking GDP, then you keep making the situation worse. This is the fundamental flaw in the program that was implemented. What about the debt? Well, the myth that it would be stabilized went away. Not only it showed up, but look at what happened. This is an interesting element here, that after protecting the sustainability myth in 2010, the German government, and I say this because the German government was the government that insisted in doing this, imposed a haircut of Greek debt here that was managed in such a way so that after the haircut, the Greek economy was in an even worse situation, and the following year, debt to GDP ratio was even higher. I mean, it's unthinkable just how much mismanagement went into this to deliver results like this. As an economist, I look at this in terror. This is one of those mistakes that will be discussed, much like the 1930s mistakes that are being discussed for many, many decades to come. So what's going on? And here I want you to compare two narratives. One narrative is the narrative that is the dominant narrative even today in Brussels. And the Greek government today is completely isolated because of the success of this narrative. What is this narrative? The narrative in Berlin is that the German taxpayer money has been financing Greek profligacies in 2010. Greek governments have been failing. They need to engineer further austerity, otherwise they don't belong. And this is the dominant narrative in Europe today. This is why I mentioned to you that the only way out of this, the only way to help Europe, not just Greece, help Europe get out of this mess, has to start in this city. Because here, by looking at things from a distance, you can have some more clarity about what's going on. What's the alternative narrative? The alternative narrative, I can call this the Athens narrative, is that Germany exploited its power to block a normal IMF program and impose excessive debt on the Greek people. The austerity policies effectively pushed Greece into a debt trap, and Greece cannot get out of this and repay all its debt. So which of these two narratives is more correct? Well, I've already shown you some pictures, but it's actually interesting to look at the IMF's evaluation of the 2010 program, but here, you need to know how to read IMF documents. Okay. So if you have a highly critical evaluation of a program, you will first say there were notable successes. Then you will say, however, there were also notable failures. If you completely messed up the politics of the situation, you're going to say there are also political economy lessons to be learned. You have to know how to read these documents to understand what's in the background. But for me, it's very clear what the IMF has been telling us in its official documents since then. You have to ask yourself, so what was that original program that has done so much destruction in Greece all about? Well, I feel I'm not competent to give you my personal assessment of this. I prefer to rely on experts from Germany to do this. In this case, Karl Otto Pohl, a former Bundesbank president, was asked in 2010 his views about the program. And this is a quote from an interview. Oh, it was about protecting German banks, but especially the French banks, from debt write-offs. It had nothing to do with Greece. The whole program was designed in order to shift losses that should have been incurred by French and German banking interests onto Greece. And they succeeded in doing that. What I had a question all along was, how come the IMF went along with this? Because the IMF is an independent institution that is not fully captured by European governments, like the European Commissions. There are also Latin American directors, Asian directors, and so forth. What happened? And we found out in leaked documents that I saw a year and a half ago for the first time, that we actually had a very nice trick play. We had the Germans and others take a commitment when the discussion was taking place in May of 2010, that they could treat the make-up numbers about Greece as fine because they had communicated with their banks and their banks would help out informally with the program. This actually was a very critical component for making any sense of the numbers that were presented in that program. This is why the program went through. One of the questions we should be asking today, since this has been disclosed, is has the German government honored the commitments it made when that program was imposed on Greece? Well, as far as I know, no. Not only those commitments were not honored, the system was gamed in order to maximize the losses that would be imposed on Greece. This is my reading of the chain of decisions that took place. So you have to look at this and say, so who's to blame for this? And yeah, I'm going to start by saying that the Greek governments have a lot of blame, and they should realize that. But in the negotiations that are taking place, and frankly, the Greek government the new Greek government has made some decisions that have not been helpful in the last few months. And they've actually made the situation worse for Greece than it could have been. So we need to accept the responsibility of Greek governments, and we need to accept the responsibility of Greek citizens who have been voting for the governments all these years, who have taken these decisions. But that actually only explains a small part of the problem. That explains why Greece got in trouble in 2010. And the IMF could have fixed that as they've done with other countries. The reason Greece had been in trouble since 2010, and this is something that has not happened in other program countries in Europe, has not happened in Ireland, has not happened in Portugal. The reason that Greece is so messed up today is because the program that was designed for Greece was made up, it was botched. And the question that the European governments and institutions should be asking, and this is one of the elements that I see the new Greek government simply asking for, is who should pay for restoring growth? Who should pay for restarting Greece? If we now know, which we did not know 5 years ago, that an unworkable program was imposed on Greece simply to protect German and French banks. What's the responsibility of everybody else? These are the questions. So for me, what I'm with this thought, I don't hear this question being asked in Europe. It's not polite to ask these questions in Europe, because many of the people involved, many of the people who are behind this failed program are still there, and they're protecting themselves and their positions. This is why I consider this to be a very severe threat for Europe as a whole. Europe cannot keep operating in this manner for another five decades. I don't really see that. I don't think it's sustainable. I consider the euro in its current form a threat to the European project overall, not just the euro, which is much, much broader than Greece. So I view Greece as a symptom of a wider problem, and again, since we're in Washington, I hope that we can inform and contribute to the debate in this city, so that this city can take, once again, as it has done so many times in the past, a leadership role and help Europe out of the mess that European politicians have created today. Thank you.
I didn't think I'd be hearing about the Articles of Confederation. The last time I heard about that was in college, I think. But I understand the point, and I think that it's a valid one. I'm going to interpose a question here, Dr. Orphanides. You say that, and I think that there's evidence to bear it out, that the symptoms here are far greater than just focusing on what's happening in Greece, and that it's a European-wide problem. In the business world, if you have a sick company, you seek a merger partner. And that's a very common way of trying to solve an economic problem that is business-specific, and you seek to have an infusion of capital by merger. Are you suggesting that there should be some broader political solution, not just an economic solution, in Europe?
In one word, yes. This is. There are many ways to solve the crisis in Europe, and we will be discussing these broader issues later on. One of them, the simplest way to do in terms of institutional design, and the most difficult to do politically, is to strive to form a federation, a true federation of Europe. And I have to say that the designers of the European project and the European Union over history had the dream that the European Union would evolve into a federation. As a matter of fact, I can tell you, from the US, it's safe to say this thing. I think Europeans have US envy. They've been looking at the United States as a big success story for centuries, and have been trying to find out a way in which they could create a European counterpart of that. So that's the simplest way. But it's politically infeasible, because in order to do that, you require unanimous agreement of the current governments of all of the member states. And I do not know too many politicians, and in particular in some countries, I would say there is no way they would accept that. I would say that, well, let's give up the power we currently have in order to benefit future generations. This is not generally how successful politicians, at least in Europe, think. So politically, it's incredibly difficult to do. This is why, rather than go in that direction, we could discuss narrower economic solutions for the problem that were available and that are not really being adopted. What we have in Europe right now, in the euro area, I think is the worst of both worlds. We have a dysfunctional currency union with really none of the benefits that were advertised as potential benefits of the currency union 20 years ago when the European Union Treaty was put in place, and severe costs. And we do also have a very large and noticeable democratic accountability deficit, which we can observe in the way I explained before. We have decisions that are governed by leaders of one country that effectively impose losses on citizens of other countries that do not have any rights to vote for the leaders who impose those losses on them. And since I flew from Boston yesterday, I have to remind you that it's over taxation without representation that this country started and was created. Well, back to those fundamentals.
Washington D.C. is no fight for that, by the way.
That's right. All right. Dr. Papaioanno.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks again to Anki for the opportunity in order to be giving some thoughts on what is going on with the Greek economy and also the Greek economy in relation to the Eurozone. Now, after Dr. Orphanides' presentation that he took us on how we came to this situation, I am going to try to give you three elements that at the moment I think they are very important for the discussion that we are going to be having on the current developments and how we are proceeding under the current circumstances. Now, first of all, I'm going to be giving you the challenges, some of the main challenges that the Greek economy is facing today. Then I am going to be spending a few minutes about the Greek program and what is the answer that it is coming from the government. Of course, the ambassador and also Dr. Orphanides mentioned a number of these things, and I'm going to be brief when I think these issues they have been covered. And then I'm going to be giving you some recent statistics of the economy, the Greek economy. Some of them they are also very much related to what you heard just a minute ago, and I am going to be trying to give only the issues from the perspective of what is the situation. I'm not going to try to give interpretations and also to give any kind of explanation of what we have seen so far. And in that respect, I would like again to say what Mr. Chimicles said earlier, that all of these views and whatever you see here, they are my own views. They are not representing the IMF. Actually, we are going to be seeing that a number of the charts and the tables that I am putting over there, I do not have even the IMF as a source. Okay, now we are today, we know the difficult situation that it is going on in terms of the negotiations. What are the current challenges for the Greek politicians under the current situation? Of course, as we know, and this is an understatement to say that reaching an agreement with the institutions, the old Troika, it is the biggest issue that they are facing. And the issue with reaching an agreement, I think it is focusing at the moment on the reforms. What kind of reforms? And also what kind of an extent of a reform it should be agreed for going forward. Now, why is it important? It's important because reaching an agreement, it is going to be enhancing the confidence of international investors, number one, and this is going to be reflected on the yields, on the Greek bonds, and secondly, in terms of the confidence of investors that they are going to be coming in order to be helping out with the growth of the economy. The second biggest challenge at the moment is to continue to maintain the liquidity and the funding of the banking sector. And it is important and it is a big challenge because it is related to the first one, and we have seen how it has been played in these very small allotments of liquidity over time in order to be maintaining the liquidity and not having big issues with the running of the real economy. But this is a major issue that it has affected the economic activity and the growth of the Greek economy. And especially it is becoming a big issue following of what we have seen in terms of the withdrawals, the deposit withdrawals that we have seen in the past few months, and also with the current situation that we see in the non-performing loans in the Greek economy. They are approaching 40%. The third major issue and challenge is the sustainability of the pension system. And the pension system, we know that it has been very much adversely affected after the PSI that we saw in March of 2012, when we had the haircut of the bonds that they were held by some of the major pension funds in Greece. So the issue right now that some of the discussions, they are on the sustainability of the pension system. It is very real and it is a very big issue. And I think this is going to be giving also a lot of confidence when we are going to be having a successful agreements of how they are going to be going forward, both for the local social cohesion, because this is an important factor for the social life in Greece, but also for the international investors, that they are going to be feeling that one of the major reforms that has to be done in the pension system, it is going to have some kind of a solution. The other one, that it is a major issue, it is the development of policies for economic growth. And this challenge is, in my understanding, the mother, if you would like, of most of the problems that we are facing at the moment, both in terms of the economic activity that we are having in Greece, but also in terms of not reaching the targets that we have in terms of the fiscal targets that the previous programs that they had set. And we heard Dr. Orphanides talking about that very eloquently, about what it was the expectations from the original program in terms of growth and how this has been affecting the debt evolution, the debt paths, and also what is the current situation with the economic growth. I'm going to be showing you a slide later on in order to be giving the flavor of what does it mean, the challenge of economic growth that we are addressing. And the acceleration of the structural reforms, and this one, it is basically the acceleration of the implementation of the agreed reforms that they have been done so far in the previous programs, in particular both in the goods and the labor markets, because these are very important in order to be increasing the productivity and the competitiveness of the economy, and in this way, in order to be achieving a long-term sustainable growth for the country, which is the essence of all of the program, especially the first programs that we had in Greece. Now, with these challenges, let me give you a little bit a flavor of what were the main objectives of the program and the successes of the programs that we had, the updates. The first and major objective of every IMF program, It is for the country in order to be able to reaccess the financial markets that has been cut off, so as that the money that the country owes because of the inflows of the aid packages, the loans that it is getting from the organization, from the IMF, and in this case, in the case of Greece, from the ECB and the EU, in order to be able to pay back without continuous big adjustment. So every program, it is trying in every IMF program, it is trying in order to be making the conditions that the country it is going to be accepted back in the international financial markets, and that it was the original big and major objective of the IMF program. Now, in terms of the conditions, the prerequisites in order to be able to reaccess the markets, what it is needed, and I have outlined three among the major preconditions, if you want, in order to be the financial markets that they are going to feel comfortable with providing again money in terms of bonds financing of the economy. First of all, it is for the country in order to be having some kind of financial and economic stability. And this economic and financial stability is primarily the developments that we need to see in the fiscal accounts. We want a country in order to be coming to a position that it does not need to be continuously having deficits, in other words, continuing having the need in order to be asking large amounts of money from abroad. So the first precondition is that whatever kind of adjustment a program it is doing, that ensures that the fiscal accounts, they are in order. And whenever the accounts, they are in order, that we have appropriate measures in order to be stabilizing the economy and the growth of the economy. So this is the number one precondition for reaccessing the market. And of course, the maintaining the sustainable economic growth and also lowering the unemployment, it is one of the factors that we need, and most of the countries that they have been through similar situations, they have tried to is to make the conditions in the short period of time, or depending on the medium term of time after the program, that they have persuaded international investors that the country is growing, and therefore it is a credible country in order to be for international investors to put their money. This one, the second precondition, it is most of the times manifested by credit rating agencies, that when they see that there is financial and economic stability and they see growth in the economy, they start upgrading the economy, which is one of the big indicators that international investors are focusing on when they try to invest in a country that is reaccessing the market. And the final one, in the objectives that we have in terms of the preconditions for reaccessing the market, it is have the financing. And in this kind of a framework, we have the current arrangements till the country is able, in order to be reaccessing the market, that we are going to be having either through the ECB, through the emergency liquidity assistance, some type of financing, so the country it is continuing to operate. Now, let me give you very briefly the government's positions. I'm not going to be spending any time because also the ambassador mentioned these things. The first one, in terms of the positions at the moment, is that they want to have some kind of a primary surplus, but not to be very big, because they are feeling, and it is true that very big primary deficits, they are affecting growth. No further cuts in salaries and pensions, and constitution of some labor agreements, restructuring of the official debt, and a strong public investment through external resources. So these are some of publicly announced positions of the Greek government during the negotiations. I'm not going to be
commenting on that, whether they are feasible or how the different partners in the negotiation deal. Let me go here and give you some kind of statistics that, in terms of charts, that they are very indicative. Now, we heard earlier that the adjustments that they have been done in the Greek economy, they are excessive and they are very substantial, let me say. And in terms of comparing with other adjustments in other countries that they have programs, they are very significant. In the first chart to the left, you see the real per capita wage. What does it mean? It means the per capita wage that it is deflated with the inflation. And you see, if you are going to be seeing around the period of the program, the 2010, this indicator here, it was around 120 roughly, and today we are roughly at 98. So we see an adjustment in the real per capita wage from the start of the program till today of around over 20%. This is a big adjustment, as also Dr. Orphanides said earlier. Now, go to the right, and you're seeing over there a chart that it talks about the adjustment in terms of the number of employees in the government sector. The number of employees that we had around 2010, when we had the first program, they, with the sources that you see over there, they were about 925,000. 925,000 people, they were working in the general government. Now, after 5 years, 4.5, 5 years that we have this chart going through, we have gone down to about 800,000. So, in a matter of 5 years, we see an adjustment of a downward movement, laying off of about 125,000 people. So, significant adjustments. This is the message that we're getting from these two charts here. Now, the labor costs and the profits, I leave it for George because this is giving some comparative statistics. Let me give you also some kind of statistics that they are going to be informing our discussion later on. And again, very quickly, we mentioned about the real growth very recently. After a small period of time of increase, it has faltered. The banks, they continue depending on the emergency liquidity assistance funding from the ECB. That the fiscal surplus, it has been on a positive ground and also significant, but it is primarily because of arrears to the suppliers. The tax revenues, they have declined relative to the targets that we had in the program, and this is because a number of private incomes and also incomes from activities, they have either reduced or people, they have chosen not to pay. The expenditures, they have increased, and you see some kind of numbers over there, and the short-term borrowing costs, they have increased at the moment, and the 10-year bond yield, at the moment, it is around 10.5%, which is significant if we are going to be comparing with the average of Europe, which is around 1.5%. Now, going into these charts very quickly, again, what I said that the first one is that Greece has returned to recession after a brief period of time that you see in between 14 and the second quarter of 14 and the end of the year of 14, that we had a little bit of a positive growth. Then we have gone in negative territory, recession again. Again, this one, it gives you the idea of how much the Greek banks, they are depending on the financing from the ECB, almost 80 billion that they are at the moment, and you see over time from 2010, all the period up to now, how much the Greek banks, they are depending on the ECB financing, and especially right now, which is the major factor for this need. It comes from what you see here in this chart, the blue line that shows the private sector bank deposits in the banking system. You see that especially after September, October of 2014, we have seen a drop of about 25 billion in terms of deposits. So the banks, they don't have capital and they need the infusion for being able, in order to function in the economy, the infusion from the ECB money. Now, let me give you a few more slides in order to be giving you a little bit of an idea of where we are in the fiscal sector. The public debt and the interest rates on the Greek debt, you heard it earlier. Right now, we are very close to about 178 debt to GDP ratio, comparing, as you see, the 2010 period that it was around 125%, and now the interest rates on the government bonds, they have been, during the crisis, you see that they were extremely high. The 10-year, it was going all the way to 30–40%. It went down for a period of time till the mid of 2014 that Greece, it came to the markets and it was able, in order to be raising some funds, it had gone to around 6–7%. Now it has gone up again because of the uncertainty that the international investors are feeling about the Greek situation. Now this graph here, and it is from the economists, from the recent economists, and it shows you the over time, the debt payments, that is one of the major issues of the negotiations at the moment, and it shows you month by month over there. Now we are in June, and you see that most of the money that they are owed in June, they are to the fund, to the IMF, and also the rest it is for recycling treasury bills, rolling over treasury bills. But they are significant amounts, and also for the subsequent months, we have July and August, that they are also very big amounts that they have to be paid. Now, in total, from now till March of 2016, that the IMF program ends, Greece, it needs to pay to the IMF and to the ECB around 13.5 billion, which is a significant amount under all circumstances, especially for a country that is in recession or close to recession. Now, let me, I'm going to skip this chart. George is going to be talking about the government budget, and especially from the perspective of the RBS. And I'm going to be closing up with a couple of slides that they are giving you also a sense of some kind of analysis that it has been done on the fiscal situation, the fiscal deficit. Now, as we can see from 2010 to today, we see a reduction in terms of the net external debt, an increase, of the net external debt as percent of GDP, that it has been over time, and it is a continuous kind of a deterioration, and this is in particular because of the shrinking of the GDP. And the next chart, it shows you some analysis, and it gives you the current situation that we are at 2015, that in order for the debt to be sustainable, meaning that it is going to be able to pay out the obligations that we have, that we need at least 2.5% primary surplus in order to be having a sustainable debt. Now, with this, this is my final chart. This is giving you also a little bit of information of what is the official debt according to credit. Now, Greece, as you see, at the total, and this is a number of about a month ago, the total government debt is about 330 billion euros. Now, the important thing to realize there is that the loans that we have to the official loans to the EU, they are about 53 billion, to the IMF 21, and to the EFSF it is about 131. So the total loans, they are about 204 billion. The majority, in other words, of the Greece's debt right now is in official hands, and this is a very important kind of a fact that we have realized, which is totally different what we had before the crisis, that the majority was held in the private hands. And now you can see that in the top of this little chart that we have the debt securities that they are outstanding at the moment. They are in total 81 billion. And it is important to realize that we have treasury bills, in other words, paper, we have government paper that it is less, a maturity of less than 1 year, and it is in the amount of 15 billion. Usually, most of them, they are quarterly paper, in other words, it has to be refinanced every quarter, or 8 or 9 months papers. But the total of that, it is 15 billion. You have heard that it was a big argument because the Greek government, it was asking in order to be raising this 15 billion from the ECB, but ECB, it has not, it is, they want an agreement first before they are going to be allowing to increase the treasury bills for financing the economy, financing the banks. The second one is you see holdouts. In other words, from the developments that we had in the private sector involvement in the famous PSI, we have still 3 billion that they are holders of debt that they have not consented with the terms of the haircut. In other words, they did not take the 53% haircut that was imposed at that time. Now, the new bonds that they came after the restructuring that we had, after the haircut, they are about 36 billion, and the ECB and also the national central banks, they are holding another 27 billion. Now, most of the discussions when the Greek government is talking about the restructuring of the official debt, it has to do with the ECB loans and also the EU loans. The IMF, of course, it is a lender of last resort, therefore it is excluded from any kind of restructuring of official sector money, and the EFSF money, that it is mostly the money that it has been for the financing of the loans to the Greek government. They are also part of the negotiation, but it is unlikely that they are going to be included in any kind of restructuring according to what we see in the national, in the international financial press. Let me start here and ask George, Dr. Tsetsekos, in order to continue with some of the other statistics.
I think instead of going directly to many other slides, I'd like to just summarize a couple of things. One is that Professor Orphanides gave us some evidence. I'm not sure if I'm 100% convinced that the program was imposed on Greece. I'm convinced that it's a failed program because there's plenty of information on that. But I do think that he has a good hypothesis that this program was imposed by the big countries or stronger countries like Germany and others on Greece. But let's go back. I mean, when you have a program and you have an agreement with the government, there are two that they need to do. The Greek governments were always eager to proceed with a program that I think, in my view, and I have evidence, that they knew ahead of time that cannot be executed, thinking that down the road is going to be a leniency or it could be other arrangements. And we have seen the results, and Michael Papaioanno gave us a picture of this unsustainable debt along with some microeconomic factors that really support what Dr. Orphanides said, that the adjustment was very, very big. From my perspective, I'm going to go very, very fast on a couple of slides and show you something else, which is one of the issues in Greece that has been an issue from the past is the fact that this country never produced something that was very competitive outside of the Eurozone, outside of Greece. And in the second slide, you can see the big gap that exists between the global trade of Greece and the exports, and I cannot see this doesn't work. The exports of Greece immediately after the crisis, 2009, observed some kind of increase, but the reality is that trade it's mostly on an import side. So Greece somehow has not shown evidence of competitiveness. And as we are in the process of negotiating new arrangements, somehow things are not as pleasant as we anticipated immediately after January. I think factors that have complicated the current uncertain environment are associated with the fact that the discussions and negotiations have been very adversarial on behalf of the current government of Greece to the Europeans, and the insistence of Europeans of falling on old agreements that I do believe that they know they cannot be held accountable for. Also, there is not a favorable climate for investment and growth prospects in the country as it stands right now for obvious reasons. And one of the reasons, of course, is the current government is mostly expanding the state at the expense of capital infusions that they can come to increase to generate growth. And finally, there is another complicating factor that took place, that started to be significant as of the previous year, which was the challenging global environment for Greece. Greece used to export in Russia and in the Middle East, and given the geopolitical changes and the embargo in Russia, this has impacted substantially several export sectors in Greece. But if you look Greece versus the Eurozone, I think the slides here demonstrate that really the adjustment, something that Orphanides mentioned and Papaioanno mentioned, the adjustment has been really hard for Greece, even though the inflated wages and growth of the country, or the GDP of the country, has gone down substantially, but it has been in the ranges of other European countries here. The adjustment that you see in terms of government spending, I know I don't have other here. So it has been convergent with the other countries, and if you see the wages, those wages converge to the other European countries, with the exception, of course, of Germany. Germany is a different something that Orphanides also mentioned. And what stands out from other European countries, of course, is the unemployment rate, which is huge. But even in Spain, we have an unemployment rate which is large, but not as severe as it is in Greece. So let's make a very brief assessment prior to opening up for discussion. I think the current efforts that we have are very myopic on both parts of the Europeans as well as Greece. The reason why they are myopic, because they are focusing attention on a letter, in my view, that was submitted to the Eurogroup by Tsipras around the beginning of the March, where Tsipras wanted to, he suggested that we need to turn the page and initiate a new program for Greece in anticipation of future reforms that were very ambiguous, where the Europeans thought, or they still think, that the program, the previous program, has not been completed, and therefore we need to go with an extension of 4 months to assess the program in exchange of Greece receiving 7.2 billion euros. So the issue here is conceptually a confusion between the parties that I don't think they speak at the same wavelength, nor do I think they mean the same things when they say we need the 7.2 million euros in exchange of certain reforms, and then the Europeans feel those reforms should have been done prior to receiving the 7.2 billion, and that Greece now believes that, or the Greek government believes that new reforms will be in lieu of receiving 7.2 billion euros. I think it's very confusing. The back and forth has developed what I call the paperology. It's a new science where documents are moving from one country to another, proposals are made. What is also very unpleasant in the fact that the Prime Minister of Greece speaks in a very negative language, making comments that certain proposals are absurd, yet at the same time, he himself says we are closer to a deal. I mean, these are very confusing statements on behalf of a politician to calm, I guess, the citizens or to show evidence of progress. But what we know for a fact is that the current fiscal position is worse. Michael presented another slide. It shows in that slide, based on information that we have until April, official information, that the deficit in Greece has increased by very close to 3.84 billion euros. Simply because nothing was taking place between January in anticipation of whatever reforms or changes or negotiations, nothing is taking place. Nobody pays taxes, we know that. And we can say this, of course, in this audience. Nobody is investing in Greece because there are discussions about exit. Who wants to invest in a country in which there is a possibility of altering its currency? So, the situation is worse. If you think Greece it's like a Comcast corporation, which is in Philadelphia, Comcast has a revenue side of 60 billion. It's similar to whatever is Greece revenues is. But Greece right now, as we speak, unlike Comcast, needs to face not a 55 billion euros in terms of expenditures to balance it, but it needs to face expenditures of very close to 65 billion. So there's a gap there that needs to be closed, and the time is of essence. 7.2 are valuable, but are not enough for Greece to get out of the crisis. Therefore, Greece would need, no matter what, another program, another way in which to finance its government activities, in light of the fact that most of the cash flow from the pensions and the municipalities has been cleaned up to pay outstanding obligations in May and June. So the situation is not as pleasant, but what is happening at the same time, there is a confidence issue for the Eurozone. And the reason for that is very, very simple. Never in the past it was a serious discussion about an exit of a country. It was a speculation, but now there is a serious discussion about pros and cons about an exit. What does it do to the confidence of the monetary union? I think if you discuss this, eventually it's going to happen. So this is a confidence issue on the structure and the operations and the way the architecture of the Eurozone was developed. Also, from my perspective, ideology, rhetoric, and resurfaces of disputes, all disputes, Germans, etc., doesn't help the situation from the perspective of Greece. And even though we know Syriza was elected with a very overwhelming vote compared to the other parties, the truth of the matter is that the popularity of the party has diminished in the last years, and I can show you a few slides. So, do we expect compromise? Everybody does. Actually, everybody expects the 3 C's to take place. One is a compromise. A second is a commitment on the terms of the new compromise, because whatever commitment was made in the past hasn't been executed on behalf of Greece, to the point where the institutions, the Troika, has penalized Greece. I mean, the fact that there is no financing right now, it's unacceptable. European Central Bank does not receive as a collateral government bonds, based on which can provide liquidity. As Papaioanno mentioned, the liquidity comes from very short kind of funding from the internal system in Greece, which is, the country cannot continue doing that. Finally, the other, in my view, the other big C is change. So it's compromise, commitment, and change. Greece needs to change. Greece is part of the European Union, and Greece needs to adhere to certain modalities and behaviors and infrastructure operations similar to the European citizen, because it's a country that belongs to a club. So imagine myself belonging to a club which is called Cosmos Club, which is a few blocks away, and where they have a dress code. I became a member of the club, and all of a sudden, I just moved to the club, moving to the club for lunch, and say, I would like to wear sneakers. This is not the dress code for the club. So somehow, Greece needs to change if it wants to be part of this club, right or wrong, good or bad, in order for the country to succeed within the system, within the club. And with this, I want to say, and I have some slides, the big questions then is how can we make the economy competitive? In the past, you were able to manipulate the currency to make it competitive. There's no way out of that. So the country needs to think about its competitive advantages, and these are very simple. It's the hospitality, it's tourism, it's shipping, and some agricultural products. Perhaps this is where investments need to be made. Right now, there's no way for exports on those particular products. I would say agricultural products, especially because of lack of trade financing. And finally, I don't think that the crisis is going to be over even within a week or tomorrow. I think we'll be there for quite some time. And this is characteristics of the Europeans, characteristics of the fact that they try to converse to something that they don't even know. I don't think the politicians, they have a very strong commitment. They say they do about the European Union. I agree with Professor Orphanides. They are envy of the US federation kind of a thing, but they cannot achieve it because they have myopic political objectives. And this is going to be with us, as I would say, all the Greek politicians have myopic objectives, and they themselves got into Greece into the problems that we have. And let's not forget it. We started with a crisis that came from the United States, but eventually the Greek politicians made a mess, and it's not one party or another. It's it's over a period of time where debts were accumulated, and the economic model for Greece was how can we please the labor market? How can we create jobs for the government, right? And now this model that cannot hold, and the new economic model is to be found, to be designed, to be discovered, and the uncertainty will continue. Thank you.
Thank you, George, and Michael, very thoughtful and provocative comments. A lot of the commentary that we read in the newspapers and in the media regard the combative negotiations that have been going on for several months and are getting into a pitched form at present. The one focal point seems to be the pension plan or the pension system in Greece. And I think you saw on one of the slides that Michael put up that there was the bullet point you mentioned with respect to sustainability of the pension program. The one thing about the pension program in Greece is that it is not a unitary single pension program. There are a couple of hundred pension programs, and the history of the pension programs has been a study in what one would call political patronage. Many of these pension programs were developed by different governments over time for different pockets or categories of civil servants. As we also know, in Greece, much of what in the United States would be private sector jobs are performed by government employees. And and as a consequence, you have such a significant number of the population occupying government or civil service positions. One of the crises that the Greek negotiators are facing, and I think the comment was made by the ambassador earlier, is the word humanitarian. And the pension reforms that the creditors of Greece are requiring the new government to adopt, to the extent that they impact the pension programs, have a direct humanitarian impact on the Greek people. In 2010 or 2012, when the PSI took place and there was a significant write-down on the government bond, the Greek government bonds, that had a direct economic dollar-for-dollar impact on the pension programs. And the reason was that the pension programs were required by law to invest and hold government bonds. So now the United States federal securities laws and fiduciary duty laws would prohibit that kind of conduct because of the interrelationship and mutual dependency of the health of the pension plans on the health of the government. That's what investment diversity is intended to avoid. But in Greece, government bonds were the backbone of the pension programs. Now, one of the things that was mentioned, I think by Michael as well, is that the number of civil servants jobs between 2010 and 2015 has dropped from 925,000 to 800,000. That's a drop of about 15%. And the one problem I wanted to raise with you, Michael, or any of the other panelists, is doesn't that just exacerbate the pension program problem, because 125,000 salary earning people are now seeking to receive their pensions? Doesn't that simply exacerbate that problem? And number two, how do you achieve sustainability of the pension program under the present circumstances?
This is my well, there is a hole there. I mean, there's a hole in terms of there's a deficit on the system. But I think one of the elements there is that it has been constituted many years ago that when there is a retirement, there is one supplementary income received by the retirees. So I think the discussions and negotiations are focusing on this supplementary retirement benefit, which is going to be devastating because many Greeks were anticipating receiving this one-time infusion of funds at the time of their retirement. This was okay when the unemployment rate was very low, but right now the situation is so bad, you don't have new people, the contributions have diminished. So I think it's going to be a major issue. And actually the deficit that I mentioned includes contributions that need to be made to the pension system to adjust for the needed resources to balance it.
Let me add a little bit to this. There are many ways one could describe in very graphic terms about how Greece got into a death spiral effectively. This is one of them. So suppose that we kill growth, which is what we've managed to do, 25% drop in real GDP in the last 5 years. Suppose you raise unemployment to historic levels, youth unemployment levels over 50%. And then you take the assets that the pension system had and you wipe them out. The PSI was a haircut that in present value terms was about 80%, not even 55%. really wipe out the assets. So is it a surprise that we have a pension problem in Greece right now? It's not a surprise. The question is, how do you solve these problems? And there are two elements to this. One element, a very important element that was recognized in Greece, was recognized in Europe, and by the IMF even before the crisis, was that the program was not sustainable even before the crisis, simply because of the demographic composition in Greece. So that we knew. Greece and Luxembourg were in the worst position going before the crisis in terms of projections of what fraction of GDP would have to be paid on pensions in the system. And this was before the drop by 25% of GDP. So we knew already before the crisis that the mix of benefits and contributions had to be severely adjusted. This has to be done. And this is an element that was part of the programs and has to be part of the program, has to be implemented. That's one element. The second element is the transition. We need to be very careful with the transition. In the United States, there were issues with the sustainability of Social Security. What you do in order to fix long-term sustainability issues is that you devise a solution long in advance of the time you will implement it, because you do not want to impose unfair changes and break promises that were made to people who are about to retire. If we enforce changes too quickly, which is some of the elements that are effectively being proposed, these are the elements that are being called excessive austerity in some regard. This is like theft. I'm going to just put it like that. We had someone who was told to retire and you will receive this pension. And then we say, oh, sorry guys, you know, these private guys or grassroots institutions, they tell you that we're not going to give you a third or half of what the agreement was you would be receiving. This is theft. So this is what is objectionable about this. And we have to be careful about how the transition is being devised. This is this is an element where, again, I think the Greek government is wrong in trying to say that changes are not necessary to the extent that the IMF and the European Commission are projecting. That's wrong. Changes are necessary. The Greek government is correct in that we have to be very sensitive about how these things are implemented. But how can we reconcile these things? Well, the question is there enough funding to take us through a 3-year transition program in that regard on the pension system, as there is on virtually every other aspect of the Greek program? This is currently very hard to see because of the lack of trust among governments in Europe. Yes.
Let me bring the level down a little bit, a notch in terms of the sophistication. Greece during the good time was 2% of Europe's GDP, right? That's what I read. This debt is just such a minor debt in the overall GDP of Europe. So this issue is not an economic issue, because as you said, money can be manipulated. If I buy a house for $300,000, I can't afford it. What I look to afford is my monthly payment. So Greece does have a primary surplus. So why isn't it that the European, Brussels group, and whatever else you want to call them these days, can't work with that because they want to make it a political issue? So how do you overcome this political issue? In Greece, the prime minister, which I've met twice in the last 6 weeks, and who's told me in my first face-to-face meeting with him on April 4th, we are being suffocated by the Germans, and that's a quote. He was elected on an anti-austerity platform. Everyone has agreed that this hasn't worked. Your numbers have proven that in the last 5 years, these implementations, these reforms have not worked. President Obama, to his credit, has said this to Mrs. Merkel in front of the White House in the Rose Garden. Economic growth is what's needed here for all sorts of things for Greece to get back on the road again. So I guess the simple question is, we can talk about the past, we can talk about history. But this government was elected in January, and it was almost DOA on arrival because of what was faced with in a short four-month period to resolve. But nonetheless, these are the realities. We're here today. We have a June 30th deadline. Simple question. You three who follow this very closely, if you were in Mr. Chimicles' shoes today, how much are you willing to give? How much more? Because this is political too. And how much more are you going to have your people suffer in your country? Because you can talk about numbers all you want, but Nick, you mentioned it, the humanitarian thing trickles down. And pensions, like this young lady here, who I know works for the Greek press office, and who's I know what her salary has been cut in the last couple of years, and all those others. What's the reality there? So how much can this prime minister, who was elected on a pro-austerity, anti-austerity platform, and becomes political for him too, because he's got his own constituency, what is it? What are his red lines in reality? What would you tell him, if you could today, in terms of what he needs to do?
I think we had full academic to start.
Mr. Tsipras, and this is for the record, I mean, I'm not saying something that nobody knows about it, he has been elected on a platform, of course, to severely curtail the austerity program, but behind that there's an ideology. I'm not sure if all Greeks voted for his ideology, but there is an ideology. The ideology, and it has been presented to the press. The ideology is the state, under these circumstances, needs to be bigger. Even though the state has failed miserably with many other governments, the state needs to be bigger. The state needs to intervene and create jobs, and most likely, foreign capital is not welcome because privatizations, opening of the market, restructuring existing debt in bank loans and other things is not on the agenda. So, given those circumstances, who in the world will be willing to invest in Greece to reduce the gap needed for bringing up the employment, generating opportunities, and providing additional support for the people in Greece? Right now, I hope everybody knows that the healthcare system in Greece is collapsing. And I'm not against this government. I mean, I've never wished to be in the shoes of any prime minister, broadly speaking, not that I have ambitions for that. But the truth of the matter is a very difficult situation. But the rhetoric, ideology, confrontation, it doesn't help it. And just another thing, all the things that have been gained with the previous government, no matter how small, because there were small wins, they have been lost in a way in which gaining those again, it's just climbing Everest. So the Prime Minister, I think, he will be able to help by navigating through the ideology, the difficulties of the ideology, and be focusing attention on certain negotiations and not becoming a priest on what is right, including Mr. Varoufakis, what is right in the system in Europe and to what extent we need to have deficits and to what extent the Keynesian economics are better than the free market economics and all this. This is, at this stage of the game, these are very academic, I would say. That's my answer.
Let me add a little bit to this. Very difficult for us to give advice that would be followed in Greece right now. I think so, precisely for the reasons that were mentioned. We had elections. The new government was elected based on a set of promises and a set of ideology that, to be frank, could not materialize. Everybody knew this before the election. So if you have anyone advice to Greece, the first and foremost advice is to face up with the facts and stop promises to even be delivered. But in order to do that, the Prime Minister will have to break with his own party, his own ideology. This is what true leadership would demand at circumstances like that. If the Prime Minister managed to create confidence with fellow European leaders by showing with some actions that he is breaking from false ideological promises of the past, my understanding of Europe is that a number of other governments would want to help. Unfortunately, what we've seen in the last few months have been to use a very useful IMF term for such circumstances, unhelpful. Let me give you some examples. We've seen the charts about the reduction of state employees. Well, it's quite unfortunate that the Greek government since taking office, despite the deterioration of the public finances, has been rehiring state employees that should not be rehired at the time when the government doesn't even have the money to pay its own pensioners. So a number of actions that have been taken by the current government in the past few months have been unnecessarily unconstructive, counterproductive, and unhelpful. The recommendation to the Prime Minister would be to reverse taking unconstructive actions. So again, as I mentioned in my introduction, I think that the new government does have a good case that Greece was cheated in 2010. Greece is severely poor right now and has a lot of debt that it should not have. The Greek government could make a case for easing of the debt that was effectively imposed on the country with false pretexts since 2010. But the Greek government cannot at the same time ignore that it does need to implement reforms. And unfortunately, in the last few months, we've seen the reversal of that. Let me mention one more thing that I consider very important. When I mention actions, what are actions that the new government could have taken that would have convinced other governments and institutions that it means business, that it does want to reform the country, and it wants to separate itself from earlier governments and the errors that we've seen in the governance of Greece in the past. In one word, corruption. What exactly have we seen the new government in the last 6 months do to improve the corruption situation we face in Greece? We hear from time to time the desire of all governments, in many decades, including the new one, that the government will actually go after the few corrupt individuals that are very, very well known inside the country, very well known inside the country, who do not pay their taxes, and who have links that are just inappropriate for a developed country. I have not seen any evidence of any action in the last few months of the new government that this government can deliver something different than the previous ones. And that's one area where the Prime Minister, if he wanted to gain a lot of political capital with actions, that's what we have not seen.
Okay, so let's open up the floor to questions.
Just
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Katerina Soko with Greek Daily. Thank you for your presentations. And I have a lot of questions, but let me start with just a couple. Greek debt, is it sustainable or not? I believe Dr. Papaioanno mentioned that, if I got it correctly, 3.5% of primary surpluses in order to make it sustainable. If that's what you said, is this something that could develop? Is it something flexible depending on your debt sustainability criteria? I believe that the Europeans decided that the debt had to be below and the IMF together below 110% of GDP by 2022. Could this change as far as the IMF is concerned in relation to maturities, in relation to interest rates? If those were to be extended and lowered respectively, could the IMF maybe change its target of 110, significantly lower than 110 GDP? And what do the rest of the panel think about the debt restructuring? Do you think it's necessary right now or in September, or a precondition for a new program? Thank you.
Okay, you put me on a difficult situation, but I am going to give you what is in the public domain. The debt sustainability analysis, it depends very much, as we know, on the assumptions about growth and about revenues that we're having, and also on the difference that it is coming between what are the revenues and what are the expenditures, both with and without interest payments. Now, as the numbers that I showed over there, they depended very much on assumptions that they were at the time before we started the negotiation, before the start of the discussions that they have been going on in Brussels. The second issue that I want to point out is with regards to the numbers of the 110 and 1 versus 120 in 2020, 2022, and so forth. These are technical type of analysis that it is done in order to be coming at a certain period of time that the country is able to service in its debt. And this kind of analysis, it is dynamic, it is not static. Something that it was taking place at the first program, it has been revised when we had the update just because the situation changed. So if we are going to be revising all of the program right now going forward, or whatever kind of arrangement it is going to, then we need to have new assumptions that they need to be realistic in order to be seen at what kind of a point of time we would say that the debt it is going to be able to be financing itself, to be manageable, to be also servicing its interest and also its principal. This is something that it needs a lot of attention, both from the government but also from the institutions. The government provides some data in order for this analysis to be done. And if I can say something, the important thing it is on Greece, on us, on Greeks, the Greek side, in order to be coming up with some kind of a scenario that it is going to be credible, that is going to be presented to these international, whatever, organizations, institutions, whatever, in order to be telling them what is the situation and how we feel about the situation. Because sometimes they are working in writing, or we are giving them information that it is too late. So from your, without going into some more detail in what you asked, I think the important thing is to do our homework before we are entering any kind of discussions, because that's the only way in order to be persuading the people that they are making a decision for us. Now, generalities, they don't work. You need to have some kind of credible way in order to be presenting every government, it's not for Greece, it's every government that it is dealing with international organizations about the situation and how they feel about the future based on events that they can always support. If we are presenting any government, Greece, if it is going to be presenting some kind of numbers that they cannot be supported, it is wishful thinking. Of course we understand. If the others, they probably would like to answer.
I could say in one word to the answer to the question, is Greek debt sustainable right now? Yes, no, it's absolutely not. And I would add the following. If the IMF were to do its analysis today, the way it does it for normal countries not in the euro area, where there is no undue influence from Berlin, the IMF would have been demanding a restructuring and haircut of Greek debt before the program is being considered. This is the 2010 position, and it's even more important today. That means that debt that is owed to the German government, that the German government replaced from what was owed to the German banks, would need to be haircut. That's really the obvious solution. And this takes us back to the fact that that's a political problem. This is not an economic problem.
And a way out of this, a good way of avoiding this issue is to consolidate the institutional debt, which is the ECBs and the IMFs, and then place it with a different structure that perhaps absorbs some losses without creating the political issues for Germany, placing it under ESM. A potential solution.
Hello, my name is Dr. Athanasios. I'm PhD in geophysics, nothing to do with economics, but I'm very well aware of what's going on in Greece. I have a question for each one of you. So I wanted to ask Dr. Orphanides, given how the situation is now and the struggle that Greece is going on in Greece, do you think it will be beneficial for Greece to really exit from the Eurozone and then maybe IMF stepping in and just do a solo program the way they did in Turkey around 2000 or so, and completely resurrect Greece on its own, let's say? That's my question to you. Then I wanted to ask Dr. Tsetsekos, do you think the fact that retired people, even at the age of 45, 48, 50 in Greece during the past, were not allowed to have second jobs, like most retired people can have here in the United States, has affected the whole pension system in Greece throughout the past that brought us to this time? And my last question, Dr. Papaioanno, is maybe I have not understood well, but I wanted to clarify this question I always had. I have been hearing in the news that the haircut that took place in 2012 in Greece made quite a lot of the private debt intergovernmental official debt. Is that true? So something that was private became debt of everybody in Greece? Thank you very much.
So let me take the first, and I believe I should also answer the third question because it relates to an answer I gave a minute ago. First of all, it's an excellent question. Would an economist advise the Greek government to exit the euro right now? And the answer I'm going to give you may not satisfy you because ultimately it's going to depend on politics that are beyond the sphere of economics. Let me try to explain. First of all, I think anybody who is doing honest economic analysis would agree that the euro as a construction has failed, not just for Greece, but overall. The euro has been a failure. So if you could go back, you would say, oh, what a dumb idea. Why didn't we listen to the advice that the majority of US economists, even European economists based in the United States, were giving to European governments 20 years ago, 25 years ago? Don't do this. It's not a good idea. Rudolf Busch was my advisor, German economist based in the United States was among them. Don't do this, Europe is not ready for it. The problem is the following. Having recognized that the euro has failed as a consequence of the way European governments have handled the crisis, does not on its own create a case for a country exiting the euro. If Greece could be out of the euro area right now and be treated the same way that Turkey was treated in 2000, I think that Greece would have been better off. But it cannot be in that position because right now it does have the euro, the contracts are denominated in euro. The relationships with other countries in the euro area are very complex, and there are many legal uncertainties that would require decisions taken in Berlin about whether Greece would be much better off outside the euro area, as it could, or not. And I'm going to leave it to you to visualize which way Berlin might choose to take decisions that would determine on whether Greece exiting the euro would be a success or not, taking into account that's something that has been pointed out by a number of political analysts, that if Greece were to be allowed to succeed outside the euro, then a number of other countries would want to follow that lead, because a number of other countries are doing so badly inside the euro area as well. This is one element. The other one, I'm going to take it, the question on the haircut. So what happened with the sequencing of events is the following. I'm going to simplify and just mention German banks. German banks held a lot of Greek debt. What happened in 2010 was that the German engineered plan gave money to the Greek government so that Greek banks could then get their money back. That was the private debt. They got all of their money back. The German banks. How was that debt replaced? Where the German government and others made a loan to Greece. So what we ended up doing is we ended up converting private debt to government debt, to official debt in Greece. That was one component. Something else that happened that reinforced this idea. German banks were also able to sell part of their debt to the European Central Bank that had independently decided to start purchases of Greek debt. And something interesting happened in 2012 when Greek pension funds were wiped out with the PSI. The political decision was that the bonds held by the ECB should be fully repaid. So it was the sequencing and structure of decisions that have a lot to do about how losses that should have been incurred by German banks ended up being incurred by Greek pension funds.
And very quickly, with respect to the question on the pensions, I have not seen a study, I'm not aware, but I suspect that those individuals are allowed to work in an environment that tight labor, supply, demand. I think it was problematic, but I haven't seen a study.
Jim Marquez.
Thank you all for your very informative and thoughtful remarks. My question is kind of a follow-up to the lady's. She asked whether the government would be advised to make an exit from the euro. My question is, and I'm very pessimistic about what I see. Everything I've read and what you've said today makes me think that there is an irreconcilability between the political judgments that have been made in Greece and the political judgments that govern what the eurozone is, how it's behaving toward Greece. So I think an exit is inevitable. Whether I'm right or wrong, what does a euro exit for Greece look like?
Well, I would suggest we actually do not seriously discuss this here. I have to say that it could be a chaotic outcome, especially if Berlin takes the kind of decisions that they've been taking the last 5 years. It would depend. It would depend very much on decisions taken in Berlin about how chaotic it could be. And I sincerely hope that despite all you've heard the last couple of hours, we can avoid talking about that outcome. This is why I think that the leadership from the city, from Washington DC, I hope will be instrumental in convincing policymakers in Berlin primarily, they're calling the shots, to avoid the disaster that is looming again in Europe.
Okay. U.S. Treasury Secretary Lew called that a bad accident. and I think that although it was unusual to end the conference by saying, despite everything we've said, let's not talk about that, it's probably one of those situations that we never at another conference. Let's hope we don't need it. Thank you, everyone, for your attention.
Let me close it up here. First, let me begin by thanking our distinguished group of panelists here today for their insight into what seems to be a continuing complicated issue one that's more of political nature than economic nature. But a big round of applause for our panelists. I want to say, in my continuing discussion with the Prime Minister on that particular day, he also brought up this last point of Mr. Marketos. And he said it would be an economic disaster for Greece if it were to leave the euro. And that's just not an option for him to do that. I, for one, want to feel that, I want to be more optimistic, that cooler heads will ultimately prevail. And in the case of Greece, who's gone through over 3,000 years of very troubled history, and we can go on through the laundry list of occupations, of civil wars, of juntas, 400 years of Turkish occupation, and so forth, and it's still there. I can't believe that an economic crisis can bring down to the knees this country with its glorious past. That would be a tremendously bad stain on the current Greek citizen. Failure, in my opinion, is not an option, and I hope and believe that that will carry the day through. But those people who monitor this more closely on the political front and who can exert that kind of pressure, and it seems, if it's not so subtle, Berlin is who's calling the shots, and Berlin seems to be the one that wants to continue to push down this path. But let's don't have Berlin, for the third time in the last century, create a European disaster. And that's what it comes to at the end of the day. I think the President Obama understands that. I think he has said that openly, and I think more so behind the scenes, and people that I talked to at the White House and the State Department, I think that comes across. I hope we'll continue to do so. We control the IMF for the large part, if I dare say. So I think we can certainly tell Lagarde and Thompson certain things to do, and tell Ms. Merkel certain things as well. But it's up to the government here and those cooler heads in Europe to move in a positive direction. Regarding the Greek economy, if I just may say, 15% is of the GDP is shipping, another 15% is its tourism. It's not a manufacturing country. It's not really an agricultural country per se. So over the years, they needed to create jobs. And those jobs were in a, unfortunately, bloated public sector, which has caused the problems. And I don't think it's within the context of this public sector itself that's the problem. It's how the public sector it runs officially that's the problem. And if I may just say, and not defending this government, but when you talk about an unemployment rate of across the board 26, 28% in the general public, 50% in the young professional, well, you need to create jobs. And unfortunately, the easy way to do it is through the public sector. And I guess if you're going to give them 400 euros a month, it's better than giving them 0 euros a month and being on the unemployment line somewhere or looking for food or something. Now, I go to Greece a lot, and I've been there 8 times in the last 10 months, and we'll go again in a couple of weeks. And the good news is, and those of you who have not been there, at least what is presented on paper and in statistics, you don't see on the streets. Nowhere, if you were to bring somebody from another planet and say there's an economic catastrophe here, would they say, where is it? How they do it, I'm not sure. But it does exist, and it's still maintained. The social fabric is there to help support. It's bent, but it hasn't broken. But it's not sustainable either. And it's up to the politicians, unfortunately outside of Greece, I think mostly, that need to bring this home. Because Greece today, as I understand it, and as you reiterated today, does not really control its own economics. I spoke to Mr. Varoufakis when I was here at the White House, and I asked him, let me ask you a question. If Greece wanted tomorrow to cut its corporate tax rate, which is one of the highest in Europe, which is important to investment, can it do so? And he said no. Which is to say, and I had this discussion with the Prime Minister, about the issues of creating investment climate. Tax rate is one, certainly the possibility of you're going to be in a stable currency is another, liquidity is another, judiciary responsibility, and he finished the sentence for me. He says, yeah, if you were to judiciate a case today, it will take you 10 years. Those are not obviously environmental climate conditions for investment. So I don't think he's anti-investment, but he has a coalition of coalitions with extreme elements. And that certainly makes it very difficult for him moving forward and to create these conditions. And at the same time, his main focus is still to get out of this very acute economic crisis that his government has faced as soon as he has come into government. So having said that, I still want to feel confident that the political heads will prevail and let the economics of it make the whole thing work. I do appreciate everyone coming out here today and engaging in this discussion and to hear it from these very, I said, distinguished group. The next event of the American Hellenic Institute, which we hope that you will join us, is another tragedy, and that is the 41-year continued illegal occupation of Cyprus, which is commemorated on July 20th every year, and the AHI will have an event on Capitol Hill on July 22. You will receive it in your emails very shortly, and I hope you can join us then to commemorate that unfortunate anniversary. But until then, again, I thank you very much, and continue to follow the situation. And what is it that you can do to help Greece? Go visit. It's a direct result. The money you spend there goes directly in taxes into the coffers. So that's the best way each one of us can help Greece, by going and having our vacations there. Thank you very much.